Imagine a world where every individual, regardless of his origins, would get an equal opportunity to succeed in life. A place where person's merit is the only deciding factor behind the success achieved by him. Wouldn't that be an ideal society? Shouldn't that be our collective aim? I'm sure most of us would love to be a part of it because we aspire to live in a purely meritocratic society. I believe the same, and so I was fairly surprised to know that the person who coined the phrase meritocracy didn't think the same way as we do. For him, that word denoted an inevitably dystopian society. So I got curious to know what is wrong with the idea of having a world where individual merit is the ultimate parameter to classify people. And how can such a society be unjust and tyrannical? Welcome to the new episode of Bookmark. And today we'll be discussing a book that aims to answer the shades of meritocracy and how its absolutism may result in tyranny. We are talking about the book The Tyranny of Merit: What's Become of the Common Good by renowned Harvard professor Michael J. Sandel.
I think it's a great choice for a discussion because when I picked up this book, I was not so familiar with this whole framework of merit and the pros and cons. It just seemed very obvious to me that merit is, rewarding merit is the most the most natural, the most obvious, the most correct thing to do. And I had no idea that the consequences of that on a large scale, when you scale this thing up, this instinct of rewarding merit and just be done with it, what kind of a society would be built, and what outcomes would happen at a bigger scale from this very noble intent. But this has been a revelation to me reading this book. And what has surprised me even more is that this debate is not new. For us Indians, it may look like a new thing, but in the West, from where meritocracy has originated, this has been going on for a long time. So others tell the viewers something about the structure of the book first before we get on with other.
Right. So the book begins with an example of an individual who was forging admissions in American universities. So he was faking documents, he was faking records of students, and he was taking money from rich people to get their children into top American universities. Of course, he was caught later, and law has taken its course. But the point that he wanted to address is that why is there is a need for an individual to take that route and reach a university. The point is that there is a high inequality. There is a prevailing inequality in American society among the haves and have-nots. So the point is that if you lose on certain things in life, that like a good education, a good job, or being in a good circle, then you lose your social esteem as well, and you'll end up living in among the rest, like the 90% of the American society is living. So a race to be in the top percent, a generation who has been in top percent, its effort to ensure that the next generation stays in the top percent, top 10%, is what the book starts from. Then it goes to different questions, that is justice and meritocracy. That then it talks about mobility. Then it talks about credentialism, and ultimately it tries to show that meritocracy is somewhere harming what we understand as a common good, where there's an complete absence of community, or even a sense of community, when you have thrown or pitted people like in individuals in a competition. So the book kind of explains the current framework that we are living in. And since we too are a democratic society, just like the Americans, and we sort of try to emulate them even in their success and everything, the book is interesting to draw. We can draw a lot of parallels in the Indian society as well.
Of course. Broadly speaking, India is a meritocratic society, and therefore.
Well, that's a debatable statement, given that we have a policy of reservation, which the critics of reservation said that that the policy has efficiently killed meritocracy in the nation.
No, reservation systems can only operate in a meritocratic setting.
Right. That's true.
So the base is a meritocracy.
Correct.
And I suppose to counter some of the negative consequences of a meritocratic setup, the policymakers have come up with this affirmative action, which is also not an original Indian idea or anything like that. It has also come from it's a very logical thing. Anywhere, I suppose it is culture agnostic, to have checks and balances in place. And there may be, you can debate about the merits and demerits of having affirmative action. Well, that's a separate debate. But just the fact that you need affirmative action is a consequence of meritocracy itself. And I think that we will go further in our discussion for that. So the book starts with the first chapter with introduction and getting in. It talks about winners and losers. That's the first chapter. So what is the essence of the argument there?
So the argument is that if you put people in some sort of competition, the consequence will be there will be winners and losers. Let's say a competition to enter a good college or get a good job, where you are pitted against one another. So the argument actually comes is that we need to create a society where every individual gets an equal opportunity to succeed, so that there is no handicap in competition. So let's say suppose there's a race. So you draw a same line for every individual. And once we have drawn that line, whosoever wins the race, he deserves his success because he has made more efforts, he's been hardworking. And therefore, that is what we understand as a just society. So in a just society where there's an equality of opportunity, at the end of the day, there will be people who will accomplish and there will be people who will fail. So that is what the current setup, global setup is basically.
Right. So it links the idea of merit with justice. That if your efforts are rewarded, then that is a just cause. Right. I think that's a very powerful...
Just say that in a meritocratic setup, it is a just society as well because it rewards your efforts. So you deserve your effort. Sorry, you deserve your rewards.
Yeah. And somewhere along the way, they talk about the American ethic and this way of thinking that collectively America is great because it is good.
Correct.
So they've connected the goodness of the people of America with their greatness.
Correct.
But I think that that causal link between good and great is very easily perverted.
Right.
And you are not great because you are good. Eventually, you are good because you are great. So that happens everywhere. And that is the perversion of the ideal that happens in the real world. I think that's something that he discusses in the book.
He also mentions Thomas Jefferson's quote, where the man described that America favors a natural aristocracy that is based on virtue and talents, rather than an artificial aristocracy based on wealth and birth. So he's describing an ideal society, that Americans are an ideal society. They are a good society because they do not have a prejudice against any individual based on his birth or how wealthy he is.
But yeah, when I came across that quote, I was fairly surprised because what he says is that birth is unnatural. Saying that natural privileges are those that are actually given artificially. He inverts that principle, I think.
He understands that if you are gifted, not so gifted, if he says that, what I believe he wants to say is that if you train hard for something, let's say you are not good at maths, so if you study, if you read more, if you solve more questions, ultimately you will succeed.
True.
So that kind of success we'll give. So let's say there's a competition which only recruits people who are good at maths. So the people who will be recruited are the one who's worked hard, not who comes from a certain birth or a family, or let's say a son of a mathematician. He will not be rewarded. Rather, the person who clears the exam will be rewarded.
Right.
That is what he understands by natural. Yeah. Whether it's natural or artificial, that's a different debate. But
correct.
That's what he wants to do.
Yeah. So the two things that I think make meritocracy such a strong, has such a strong attraction and a universal approval in all societies is the fact, one is that it appears to be just. It rewards people for their efforts. And secondly is the chance that it provides to people to rise above their ranks, to go beyond where their earlier generations had been. It gives them a fair opportunity to earn wealth, to gain social status.
It also gives them freedom to choose.
Right, right. The freedom to choose whatever they want to be.
So you'll not be subjected to a certain profession or a certain class just because you're born
Right.
there.
So let's come to freedom a little while later.
Right.
Let's first get mobility out of the way. What is the link between merit and mobility?
So what they are suggesting is that the American dream, that the son of a farmer or son of a penniless immigrant can succeed in life, and he can attain the same position or even a greater position than, let's say, a son of a CEO or son of a big politician. That is the American dream. So the mobility is that while he works hard, he'll rise up the social ladder to a point where he become the new elite.
Right.
So the elite is never fixed; it is always interchangeable. Like in a, let's say, in a monarchy or in a medieval aristocracy, the point was that if you are born in a certain family, then only you can have the elite status. American society gives the opportunity for for every individual to become that elite. So there can be a fresh crop of elite, let's say 50 years from now.
So that's the American ideal.
That's the American ideal.
But I think he clarifies in the book that that ideal has not come to be real, because over a period of time, mobility has decreased even within the same structure of a meritocracy, and now you have huge inequity of wealth and power, obviously, because wealth translates directly to power. So you have, I don't remember the exact statistics. If you can help me with that, that you have.
So he mentioned one statistics that mobility has stagnated over time. Of children born in 1940s, almost 90% earned more than their parents.
Right.
Of children born in 1980s, only half surpassed their parents' earning.
Right, right, right. And that also reflects in the fact that just about some 5% of the Americans have a control over some disproportionate, some 60, 70%.
They just
of the
give equation of
resources.
1% having somewhere more than 99% or something. That's
Something like 50% or something. But basically saying that a small section of society controls most of the resources, and the rest are have-nots, where they are just dependent on these elites.
Correct.
So why does meritocracy fail that way? I mean, why is mobility then? Why does it get impeded, and why doesn't that ideal become real? What do you think?
So it has run out its steam. The point is, it gave results till a very long time, till the 1990s globalization. Let's say similar case in India. The post-globalization generation had witnessed a rapid rise in their income. People have gone from poor background to middle class to upper middle class to even rich. That has happened in the last 20 years because the opportunities have opened. The point is that in America, the opportunities shrinked over the course of time. Maybe due to automation, maybe technological advancement, maybe policy where they allowed multinational companies to go move out of America, get labor from different countries like China, India. So the working class in America suffered over the course of time. And it reflected in 2016 elections when Hillary Clinton said that she represents, after her defeat, she said that the educated, the people who contribute more to the GDP, to American GDP, are the ones who are supporting her, while the people who are not contributing that much are the ones who are supporting Trump. So basically, what she's saying that the educated and the elite class are supporting her. They contribute more to society, whereas the working class or the middle class or the poor section of society, uh, they are just racist in their approach because they want to limit resources to themselves. They have lost the race of globalization. That's exactly not her word, but I'm just paraphrasing that. What she intended to say is that these people have lost the race of globalization. These people have not got good college degrees. They are not in top jobs. So these people are more or less burden on American society, and that's why they are supporting a person like Donald Trump, who has promised them some rewards over the course of time. Whereas the hard working class, if you work hard, you'll succeed. That's what she said exactly in the election. So she was saying the American society again that to work hard, the same message that has been delivered to them, let's say, 100 years ago. The point is that since that message has run out of its impact, we saw she defeated.
No, but I think there is also one more factor in the impeding of mobility, which is that forget about technology, automation, forget about outsourcing jobs and other economic or technological reasons. I think it is inevitable that any society, when they adopt a meritocratic system, uh, in the course of time, it will again get stratified, and the initial chaos, which is seen as good chaos, which is seen as a virtuous thing, because it gives people opportunity.
Right.
Eventually, that ends its course, and
Right.
and it comes back a full circle, where the society is now stratified according to some new norms. For example, uh, this Charles Murray, although he's a controversial figure, and maybe we'll discuss that some other day. But Charles Murray, in his book The Bell Curve, makes a very pertinent point, and I suppose that point itself is fairly non-controversial and quite straightforward. Which is to say that if there is a society where there is perfect equality of opportunity, and everyone gets a shot at being, at rising to the top, uh, over a course of time, over a few generations, then the society, because there are two factors, there is your genetics and there is your environmental factors. So if you cancel out all environmental differences, then the only thing that remains, the variable that remains, is genetics.
Right.
And so he says that society will inevitably get stratified as per your genetic makeup. And that, in other words, means that you will have certain families who are probably high IQ or whatever you may call it. They will be at the top. Let's say, elites of the current era, for example, the CEOs of Google and AI, people at the cutting edge of AI, all these high brain powered people, their children will eventually take their place, and society will then be structured, stratified as per IQ. So that seems to me to be a very, very big failure, a systemic or a design flaw in meritocracy.
Right. But the point is that even environment cannot be cancelled out in a realistic setup, because a person has wealth, a person who has succeeded in life, he has private property, he has wealth, he has connections. So more or less, his children will have an advantage. So I don't see to what extent can you level it up.
Correct. No, that point is well taken, because what I was getting at was that even if you give perfect equality of opportunity,
Let's say a communist state where private
everything.
property is abolished.
So that is the second point. If you really want to give that, then that means that you'll have to abolish private property.
Correct.
And you will not allow transfer or intergenerational transfer of privilege in any form. Today, the only form of privilege that can be transferred is wealth.
Correct.
Because we are in a largely capitalistic society. So that is the only form of privilege allowed. You cannot transfer other things like skills and your, let's say, your knowledge, craft, all that is outlawed or socially made impossible. But wealth is transferred, and wealth directly translates to power.
Correct.
And so your status in the society is obviously generationally transferred to the next in line, and that brings in a new form of inequality. Okay. So that's where I think Sandel also gives this beautiful quote about meritocracy not being a cure for inequality, but an excuse for it.
Right, a justification of inequality.
Right.
But that brings me to Michael Young's comment in the book. Just wait a second. The book was called "The Rise of Meritocracy," where he described that in a perfect meritocracy there will be haves and have-nots, and over the time there will be a social discord, and it will result into political backlash. This was written in 1958. In 1990s, his own party members, basically he was from the Labour Party in UK, his own party members advocated for a meritocratic society. In 2016, the result of American presidential election actually reflected the concern that was shown by Michael Young in 1958, where the have-nots revolted against the elites, the educated elite, the elite who they see had rigged the system of meritocracy. So the angst was not against meritocracy; The angst was against the elite who somehow rigged the system and are not letting them have mobility over the course of time. So the argument from the other side also comes that we need to create a setup where mobility is more accessible. So basically, they are not asking for perfect meritocracy. I mean, they're asking for perfect meritocracy, but specifically, they're asking for perfect mobility. Like, if they work hard, they must be able to rise up the ladder. And
Right.
if that doesn't happen, the system is rigged against them.
So I think there is merit to that argument because
Of the system being rigged against them.
in some way, I mean, it's not a conspiracy that there is some grand conspiracy where people are sitting on the top, some Rothschild is sitting and calling the shots. But but the system, like I said, there is a design flaw in the system, and what is advertised as meritocracy is not really that. You see, because over time, like we discussed, that over time mobility will naturally, because of the design of the system, mobility will slow down. There will be consolidation, and there will be people who will hold on to their place in the system,
Right.
Especially the elites, because they have the incentive to do so. And it will only be the people at the bottom and in the lower rungs of the social ladder who will desperately want to replace those at the top, and those at the top will cling to their positions because that's the position of power. So there is nothing surprising about it, and the people down there will always feel that there is some conspiracy we are not being told, because the system
Right.
rewards your efforts, and our efforts are certainly not getting rewarded. So there's something wrong.
Correct. Like, even the argument against uh, this industry that goes, the entertainment industry, is that the elites are holding power and they are not letting outsiders come in. The anger is against when they use the terms like nepotism.
Right.
Now the point is that nepotism is basically a generation transferring its influence, its money to, or its capital and influence everything to the next generation. Now the point is that the first generation actually worked hard to transfer that, and if you are cutting that transfer, then why will the first generation work hard in the first place?
Correct. Absolutely. And
Right.
the entertainment industry, the film industry, is a great reflection of the failures of the meritocratic system.
Right.
And how so? Because uh, the appeal of meritocracy, like you said, is in the chance that it gives to anyone to rise up to the top. So, in the Hindi film industry, for example, everyone wants to be an Amitabh Bachchan or a Shah Rukh Khan.
Right.
But there is only one out of a million, perhaps, who is able to even, to some extent achieve that,
Correct.
become a moderately successful actor,
Right.
right? So that people start recognizing him. Forget about being, a superstar like Amitabh Bachchan. But even that is rare, just getting by.
Correct.
The rest of the people, as we see, even in the movies, they show how they struggle, how the strugglers make the most of Bollywood, and how they end up just वो अपनी चप्पलें घिसाते रहते हैं और ऑडिशन के बाद ऑडिशन देते रहते हैं and nothing happens. So people don't talk about that. People talk about the black swan because that is dazzling, that is inspiring, that gives you a good narrative, a good story to tell. But what about the million others who don't make it?
Okay.
And that reflects perfectly the design flaw that I was talking about, in terms of how meritocracy is a false promise of hope,
Right.
which works only in very specific, a narrow band of conditions, where you have economic upheaval, or there's a major political change that is happening, like how it happened in the beginning of when India got independent. There was hope. There was
Like, even post liberalization,
Exactly.
chaos happened and
Exactly.
people rose up the ladder.
So the consequences of that mobility is something also that is usually not discussed. For example, what effect does this mobility of individuals have on community, have on clans, have on the family, the institution of family? You have two brothers.
Right.
Two brothers, one is academically gifted, the other is not, right? So the brighter, so-called the brighter sibling rises up the ranks, becomes a big shot, and the other guy is just doing, is basically some low-rung job somewhere. Will their families continue to remain as closely bonded as in a pre-industrial setup, for example?
Right.
That is certainly not the case. So
The class divide will emerge.
the class divide will emerge within the family.
Within the family.
So that's a huge stress on the institution of family itself. The cultures will change. Their social.
So I agree with that class divide existing even within a family. On a larger scale, when we talk about class divide, the solution that comes from the other side is that more education can solve the problem.
Right.
So they say that if we educate people, and those who are unwilling to get educated, they are the only ones who are left behind in the race of globalization. Because in today's time, education is available to almost everyone.
This reminds me of my childhood, where uncles and aunties used to scold beggars.
Right.
Say कि पढ़ते क्यों नहीं हो तुम? So even at that age I used to wonder कि पढ़ के क्या होगा? but I thought कि नहीं ठीक है पढ़ने से होता होगा कुछ. But yeah, so this is exactly what it is.
Because there are some philosophers who also said that for liberals, every economic problem is an education problem.
Yeah.
So if you just educate people, if you just make them more informed, they'll be knowledgeable about their decisions that they make in life.
Correct.
So it is basically giving them agency. What they see is that we are empowering their agency by giving them education.
Correct.
Doing that can actually help in just sort of lessening this class divide.
Right. Because again, I mean, it is such a big conundrum. It's such a close-knitted, like a ball of, what do you call, like a ball of wool. कितने सारे knots हैं उसमें. That this whole idea of education helping with seeing clearly and all that, and letting them, is again linked to the idea of mobility. That education, if it provides that mobility, then all these arguments are valid. But if education, despite having the best education, you're still stuck in the same class, you cannot transcend your class, then this whole argument falls apart, and which is what we see rampantly in today's times.
Right.
And credentialism is on the rise everywhere. Not on the rise, it's already crossed the limit. Even in India, in political debates, you see,
Right.
like one side will say that the other guy, like even with our prime minister, the opposition says that, oh, his degree is fake, as if it matters. In the real world, it doesn't matter. The only thing that would actually matter in case of such an allegation is that someone has hidden or someone has lied. But if you go behind the motivation of lying, is again this credentialism, that you need to have a degree to be able to be perceived as someone competent. But that's not the case. I mean, there is no actual link between competence in politics and having a degree.
Right. But it is linked with social esteem.
Yes.
It is linked with you having access to better economic opportunities.
Correct. And plus, you see, the hypocrisy of the political class here is that even though they know that there is no such thing as a link between education and power,
Right.
at least in their case, yet the rhetoric of politics is all about meritocracy. That you study hard, you work hard, and you will get the results. Right? And so they have to have that badge of credentials to prove that they are themselves the result of the same thing that they are advocating for. That is what it is. While in real life, it doesn't happen.
Basically saying that they are product of a meritocratic society.
Exactly. Because that's what they're selling.
Right.
That's what they're selling.
Right. So let's make an argument from the point where we agree that, okay, meritocratic society is an inevitable scenario. It isn't something which is inevitable in modern world. There will be people who will say that.
It is. Of course it is. That is why it is everywhere.
Right. And so the answer will come is that, so the question will arise is that if people who have succeeded in life, they have succeeded because of their own talent. So how is it unjust? Those who have failed over the course of time, they have failed because they couldn't make the wise decision.
Right. So I think Sandel in this book does answer that very beautifully, and he takes on the question on a philosophical level, and he says that ultimately, what is talent? Is talent something that you have worked for? Let's say you are born a genius, or you're born a talented cricketer, right? So it's just something that is random, at least in this framework. Let's forget about the religious explanation for it. But in a purely secular modern framework, your talents are arbitrary. They are not a result of anything that you can explain. They are a result of randomness. So ultimately, if your talents are rewarded, what is it that is actually your effort in that?
No, what they're saying is that let's agree that geniuses are born. Let's agree to that statement. The point is that no genius has succeeded in life without working hard.
That's not true. I mean,
Let's say that,
that's a fairly, that's an exaggerated claim.
or let's say a good chunk of geniuses have succeeded by working hard.
Okay.
Let's say
Right.
like that.
Right.
So let's say there's a talented a cricketer who has a knack for good skills and all.
True.
He works hard. He works day in day out, and over the course of time, he gets reward of what he have worked. So obviously, he's a success.
Yeah.
And he deserves whatever rewards he gets. On the same hand, another person who may have some talent or not. Let's say he has a talent who doesn't work hard and he's left behind.
Yeah. So there are two things here. One is that if you have talent and you work hard, you get rewarded. Right. If you have talent, you don't work hard, you don't get rewarded. So that seems very fair.
Correct.
But what if you don't have talent? Right? Second point is that what is rewarded is not always universally good. Like, for example, take the case of hockey players in India or kho players. Right. They could be more talented than your average, cricket star.
Right.
But what outcomes in life do they look forward to? Nothing much, right? So the market determines what is rewarded and what is not, and that point also comes out clearly in this book, where he says that the market forces do not define what is good or what is virtuous, but they define what is in demand by the collective. So more often that is a result of commercial motives and commercial engagement with.
But market being the dispenser of justice is a very is a very common belief in today's time.
Correct, because
even Sandel gives an example of his own lecture in China, where he talked about a Chinese teenager who sold one of his kidneys to buy an iPhone or iPad or something. So he asked the students there in China, what do they have to say about it?
Right.
So there were some students who, with their libertarian view, and said that if the child sold his kidney without any force, without any coercion, out of his own choice, then it's fair.
Right.
There's nothing wrong in doing that. While the other side said that it is unfair or it is unjust of the rich to exploit their wealth and use it to buy organs to live longer. So somebody countered that argument and said that having earned their wealth, rich people are meritorious and so deserve to live longer.
This is just one step away from a eugenic argument, saying that those who are successful are the ones that have the right
to inherit the wealth.
Yeah. The rest need to be, unki
Done away
safai
with,
kar do. Yeah. So it's just one step away from that. And what Sandel argues in the book is that this sort of thinking is kind of inherent in meritocracy. This is the kind of mindset that people have after meritocracy has run its fair course.
Right.
And I think that is quite a fair assessment, because you see people around you, successful people often tend to attribute their success to their inherent goodness and their inherent superiority.
Correct. That brings us to the conversation about affirmative action.
Right.
So in India, affirmative action has been there for last 75 years, or even more, since after the Pune Pact itself. And the argument that against affirmative action comes to that it has killed meritocracy over the course of time, which may or may not be like, but which may be true, but my argument against affirmative action in India is primarily because is not on the grounds of meritocracy, but on the grounds that it has a flawed historical basis.
True. True.
So the question of people talking about meritocracy being killed by the reservations is somehow a very flawed argument.
Right.
I mean, it has impacted, let's say, admissions and all that. But the point is that the basis on which the affirmative action has been done in India, that itself is flawed.
No. True.
But coming to the point of affirmative action, let's say the ideal affirmative action happens, where the people who have failed the race of, let's say, of meritocracy, they have been given something to sustain their livelihood by those who have succeeded. It will be a very kind and generous act. But there also the point is, what even Sandel makes is that it is not always about money. It is also about self-esteem.
True.
The self-esteem is that you lost because you are a failure. You lost because you could not succeed, and your failure is completely of your fault. The system has nothing to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is somehow results in even bigger resentment among people,
Absolutely.
and the divide and discord will grow over the time. So no amount, I don't believe that any amount of affirmative action can actually wage that gap.
Yeah. In fact, this mindset that we are talking about, this victimhood mentality, which is everywhere, and the woke culture that we see, these seem to be very logical outcomes of these systems that we have inherited. Meritocracy being one of them, and these are all complementary systems. These are in different spheres of life. These, what we take for granted as the right and the correct social order, right? These are the things that reinforce each other and ultimately lead to a world where these problems are now being detected, and to some they even seem unbearable now. Right. So democracy, free market capitalism, especially at a global scale,
Right.
and meritocracy, these are all interlinked ideas and they support each other. And their inherent flaws are now playing out, and the outcomes that are coming out are not very pretty. So when we talk about affirmative action within this framework, I think we are losing the point, because there is no clear solution. You can't hold on to the whole structure while making it. These are like small tinkering you can do here and there, and to make incremental changes. Of course, I totally agree with you that the affirmative action in India is built on a totally false paradigm, on a premise which is absolutely false and needs to be discarded. So, which does not mean that affirmative action itself needs to be discarded, because there will always be people who will need a helping hand.
Inequality will exist.
Inequality will exist, and inequality in the long run turns toxic.
Right.
So that's something that has to be acknowledged by everyone across the board. And so how do you reduce the gap between the haves and the have-nots? You cannot eliminate it, but how do you reduce it is a debate that should happen in society, in a healthy society.
Right. So coming to the other word that is there in the title of the book, that is called common good. So he ends, or somehow he concludes the book with the discussion on common good, and he refers to Hegel, and he says that Hegel did not see work mainly as a means to the end of consumption. Instead, he argued that work at its best is a socially integrating activity, an arena of recognition, a way of honoring our obligation to contribute to the common good. So it is not all, an individual working is not always about how much wealth he earns, or how much he can spend after that. It is also about how he sees himself as a part of the society, what he is contributing to the society. That is the basis of his self-esteem or the dignity that emanates from it. In a situation where an individual is, like we just spoke about, the victimhood mentality, in a victimhood setup, he'll lose all his self-esteem. he is more or less a burden on the society.
Yeah.
That is what's being projected. And this individualistic setup cannot answer that.
Yes.
The answer that lies within the community. Because I saw Sandel interacting with Shashi Tharoor. So there he also used the word
In Jaipur Literature
in
Festival.
Jaipur Literature Festival. So he used the word of nationalism. Now, the point is that nationalism is such a loaded term that whenever you use that word, you will be labeled
Fascist.
as a fascist, correct?
Especially in the West.
Especially in the West, correct. So then he clarified that he didn't mean that kind of nationalism, so different kind of. But the point is that they are now looking for some, even like in the artificial structure of nationalism, to somehow fill the gap that is there with the loss of community.
Yeah.
Because individuals are in a competition, they are not looking for each other. One example that post globalization, they don't even know where their goods or the thing that they buy, where it is coming from.
Correct.
So they have no connection with one another. There's only transaction is a monetary transaction. There's no community. The absence of community has somehow eroded the entire concept of common good.
Yes. So, like I was saying, that all these systems, whether it is political, whether they are economic, whether they are social, they complement each other, and they are merely reflections of each other's fundamental assumptions. So, when today the West is at least at a point where they are discovering the limits of their own hubris, where they're now finally acknowledging that they were not right.
Right.
Given the ecological crisis, given the political upheavals all over the place, given the hard economic realities, given the end of social mobility,
Correct.
all these things are not pretty sights for anyone. And now that they've come to that point, they have started this journey of turning back,
Right.
and and sort of trying to course correct. The first step in that is to acknowledge the
it.
mistake, and that is what they're doing. I believe that this book is a great case of that. But when it comes to providing solutions, they're still stuck in the same paradigm.
Correct.
And they're always talking about democracy as an inherent good.
Correct.
Because democracy itself optimizes individual happiness, right? And when it looks at individual as the unit of society,
Right.
then obviously other orders of social, of society, they are compromised. Their welfare is compromised. For example, the family. Now that's a different debate to go into, and there are several nuances there. But fundamentally, the point that I'm making is that if someone is criticizing meritocracy and then holding on to the ideals of democracy or free market capitalism, that is a very half-hearted approach, because that's like saying that, okay, let me fix this box and leave the rest of the shelf as it is. That does not work. And that is the reason why I found the only part of the book that I found unconvincing was where he was giving prescriptions. Although he's been very careful with that, because I think he does realize that he doesn't have any concrete solutions. But the prescriptive part of the book is very lukewarm to me. But the rest of the book, I think, is wonderful.
Absolutely.
And
it changed my perspective towards how you look at
yeah, absolutely, it does. It is very persuasive. Like any Sandel's work.
Right.
The previous book that I had read was Justice, and that itself is a phenomenal book. And this one on merit is, it. Of course, it comes from a long tradition. It's not just Sandel who's writing it. Sandel often quotes. He's standing on the shoulder of other people, and there is a long intellectual tradition of the critique.
The best part is that such conversations are happening.
Absolutely, and that they're happening in the West, where the power resides. हम यहाँ जितनी भी बात कर लें, कुछ होने वाला है नहीं.
So we'll end with one quote of Michael Sandel, which somehow summarizes the entirety of the book. Inspired by the heroic rise of few, we ask how others might also be enabled to escape the condition that weigh them down. Rather than repair the conditions that people want to flee, we construct a politics that makes mobility the answer to inequality. Breaking down barriers is a good thing, No one should be held back by poverty or prejudice, but a good society cannot be premised only on the promise of escape.